Chairman Pai, thank you for joining us here at Just the News.
Hey, great to be with you.
So I want to get right into it first, and we have a tweet here that you put up calling out the Sandwich Islands Communication, which is a company that was based in Hawaii. And you guys said we issued one of the largest forfeiture orders ever against two companies and an individual that controlled each. Money was spent not on communications networks, but on massages, travel, tuition, a vehicle, a home, and more. Now, you go on and you posted a statement from the FCC calling out this individual who was supposed to be taking this money, this government contract money, to help the people of Hawaii get communication networks, and instead spent it on his personal masseuse, vacations to Europe and the South Pacific, his children's college tuition, and even hired his own wife and his children as well, to the tune of $50 million. I mean, that's an incredible figure. I guess my biggest question is, why did it take 15 years to discover this?
That's a great question. Well, I have zero tolerance for waste, fraud, and abuse, both as a regulator and as a taxpayer. And one of the things we've done over the last 3 years under my leadership is to ferret out cases in which somebody who gets money from the FCC is not using money they have wisely. And that's exactly what happened here. The situation's been kicking around for a while. There's been a lot of investigative work behind the scenes to try to track down how they were spending the money and how much money they got and where they were deploying it, et cetera. But I'm glad we finally got to the stage where we could impose this fine of $50 million almost, which was one of the largest, as you said, in the FCC's history, because we want to send a message, no matter who you are, what company you represent. If you're not using money from the FCC to build what I call digital opportunity for citizens, then you're going to pay a severe price.
And it appears there might be a similar case here in Mississippi with AT&T to the tune of $283 million. Can you comment on this?
Yeah, so state regulators have brought this to our attention, and we'll be looking at that as well to see if there's any situation there that needs to be addressed by the FCC. But overall, the message is pretty clear that money that is distributed by the FCC has to be used for the benefit of taxpayers and taxpayers only.
And this individual, I mean, why did he think he could get away with this for so long? I mean, clearly there was a lack of oversight on this. I mean, and how common do you think this is?
I'm not sure how common it is, but what I can say is that we've put a premium over the last 3 years on making sure that those folks who thought that the gravy train was going to keep going down the tracks realize that that train has stopped. And across our different programs, this involves what is called the high cost program, but across all of the different Universal Service Fund programs that we oversee, the Lifeline program, the Rural Healthcare program, as well as the E-rate program, in addition to the high cost program, we're taking a careful look to make sure that any recipient of federal funds is using those funds wisely. That's more important than ever during the pandemic, when we need to make sure that money is going to close the digital divide, not to line the pockets of executives like this or companies that aren't really looking out for the public interest.
Well, we always like finding uses of taxpayer dollars that are being wasted and ferreting that out, so we applaud you for that and hope you'll keep us posted. I want to talk a little bit about 5G. Now, we know this has been a priority for your administration, especially in rural areas. You're from Kansas, to get 5G to rural folks. I want to look also at the national security implications and get your take. Obviously, there's the Intel community. They're looking at this as well. How do you think about the security risks that are currently in play right now with Huawei and other players?
A great question. So 5G, the next generation of wireless connectivity, is going to be transformative for our economy and our society. Telemedicine, telehealth, precision agriculture, all of the great things that we do with broadband are going to be turbocharged by 5G. But that comes with a risk, as your question implied. Given that it's going to be involved in everything from transportation to healthcare, manufacturing to agriculture, we need to make sure that those networks are secure. And the problem is that one of the biggest players in the 5G infrastructure space is the Chinese company Huawei, along with another Chinese company, ZTE. And so under our leadership, for the first time, we prohibited the use of FCC funding from going to companies that use that funding on Huawei or ZTE equipment. We've also gone to Congress and asked them to fund a rip and replace program. So to the extent that there is problematic Chinese equipment already in their networks, we want Congress to allocate funding for those carriers to rip it out and replace it with trustworthy equipment. And we're taking other steps. I personally have been involved working with my foreign counterparts to make sure that all similarly aligned countries have a shared view of the security risks here. This is not a situation where we can just take a risk and hope for the best. We need to make the right decisions in terms of security now, as we're at the dawn of the 5G age, as opposed to afterward.
Absolutely. To your point on foreign collaboration, we just had a headline that Nokia, which is a European company, won a 5G deal to provide 5G to the UK. And previously, Boris Johnson at the UK had been looking at Huawei to be providing 5G infrastructure for them, and they chose to go in a different path to this Finnish company, Nokia. Were you working with the UK government on this, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've been working with the UK government and a variety of other governments. I personally have been to the UK, Germany, Brazil, Bahrain, Malaysia, just talking about the fact that we need to have a shared understanding of what the risks are. And those conversations that I've had over the last year and a half, along with some of my counterparts from the State Department, DHS, DOD, the White House, and others, are bearing some fruit here. And I'd like to think that the UK decision in this regard is one example of that.
We saw also Germany seems to be putting the brakes on Huawei involvement as well, and that's a much more recent development. You mentioned that you had been working with Germany. I want to ask a broader question, which is that Trump has often been criticized by the quote-unquote international community for quote-unquote going it alone. But it seems that in this case for 5G, we also saw separately Secretary Pompeo applauded the UK, France, and Germany for speaking out against China in their aggression in the South China Sea, according to their words. So we're starting to see some European countries who seem to be in some ways echoing the very strong posture against China that Trump has been speaking about for years at this point. What was that like for you initially? Because as you said, it took some time to develop and to sow these seeds. What was that like for you, sort of, being a thought leader, at least representing an administration who was not afraid to go alone?
Well, I can tell you in this regard, we have been exceptionally multilateral. We go into these meetings, our position is not, here's what the U.S. thinks, you should adopt it wholesale. It's, we want to understand how you see the risks. Where do you see the risks coming for 5G networks that operate in the UK or Germany or India or Bahrain? And then sharing our view, here's what we're thinking. The U.S. is a leader in 5G development and deployment, and we're doing so using trustworthy equipment. And so I think that productive exchange of views has been very, very helpful. Additionally, I will say that a lot of these countries have recognized on their own that the risks of the Chinese Communist Party are just too great. Given the fact that any company subject to Chinese jurisdiction has to comply with requests from the Chinese intelligence services, given the Chinese Communist Party's behavior on everything from Hong Kong to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang to surveillance of Chinese citizens abroad. I mean, it's just too much of a risk to say, let's let them into our 5G networks that are going to power entire segments of our economy. That's a risk that many countries, I think, are now recognizing is one that is too big for them to take.
And on a related note, I spoke to Adam Bullard at the White House, who works on innovation, and he actually mentioned that he thinks the 5G is in many ways passé, that it's really for him. He said he's interested in 6G. How are you thinking about this?
Yeah, we're always looking to the future. So even as we've been very aggressive on 5G, we're thinking about the next generation of technologies that isn't even here yet. And so 6G is one of them. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all of those new emerging technologies is something that we're taking a look at. So we've got new spectrum initiatives that we anticipate that in coming years, some of those great innovators here in the United States will be able to use to pioneer 6G technologies. So even as we're racing in the present, we're always keeping our eyes on the future too.
And Chairman, I want to turn to a topic which I know is one of your favorites, Section 230. So we did have the president tweeting out yesterday, in fact, he said, repeal Section 230, and he did that in all caps. And I know that the FCC has, for 45 days, you had a comment period starting in early August. What is your takeaway from the comment period?
So thus far, as you mentioned, the comment period recently closed. And so we'll be working with the FCC staff to go through those comments and to get a recommendation from them on the way forward. So I can't comment yet on where we might end up or when, but I will say that we will take a careful look at this issue. And we know it's an issue that's generated a good deal of public interest.
Is there a split so far, positive, negative, a read on the comments?
Yeah, I can't give you a preliminary take thus far. We still need to sit down with the staff and to figure out exactly where the balance lies.
Now, we have seen public comment from some commissioners. Democrats in particular have said they oppose Trump's move on this. Republicans have said that they think it makes sense. And you are the chairman. You've taken a more sort of trying to take a more detached role to look at everything first. And we did note that President Trump had tweeted something and Twitter blocked it and said, you can't share this. It was about the flu season. He said, flu season is coming up. Many people die every year, sometimes over 100,000. And despite the vaccine, are we going to close down our country? Anyway, it was a tweet about the flu. And his arguments about COVID versus the flu. And you weren't even allowed to share this on Twitter when you tried to paste the URL and share it either in an email or elsewhere. Twitter actually put a pop-up that says you cannot share this. Why can't you share this? It says we try to prevent a tweet like this that otherwise breaks the Twitter rules from reaching more people. I at the White House recently interviewed some attorneys general who were at the White House and said that they do believe that the president is right, that there could be very well something here as it relates to Section 230 in terms of advertising to be an open forum, and yet at the end of the day they're not. What do you think that the state attorneys general see that perhaps some people who are critics of the president are missing?
Well, I can't speak to what they are seeing, but what I can say is that I've been talking for years about the fact that social media platforms need to be more transparent. In fact, in November of 2017, so almost 3 years ago, I talked about the fact that Twitter, Facebook, and some of these other social media platforms are using algorithms that make determinations about what consumers see and what they can't see, and that they needed to be open about how that was operating. And I think 3 years on almost, that debate is more aggressive than ever. And I think part of the reason is that people are using these platforms without a full understanding of exactly how these decisions are being made. So I do think this is an important issue, as I said. And so we'll be taking a look at all the comments in the record in this particular proceeding and more generally watching the debate in Congress that's going forward.
And I'm sure you saw the report, the House report that was just issued yesterday. Again, lots of breaking news on this topic that said that there was evidence. It was a House Republican-led report that found, according to the report, that there was bias among Twitter, Facebook, and other social networks against conservatives. What's your reaction to the report?
So unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to read the report. I know it just came out, and we've been super busy. We just published our October agenda yesterday, so when I have a chance, I'll certainly sit down and peruse it. But no, I think this is an issue that's increasingly crossing party lines. You see Republicans and Democrats talking about the influence of technology in our lives, and how are we seeing what we're seeing? And I think that's an issue that I think is going to be consistent over the next coming months and years.
Sure, and one last question on this topic, because I work for a media company. We have to work with these technology networks. Facebook and Twitter and Google, they all provide funding to news organizations. In some case, for Facebook, for example, they pay for original TV programming, news TV programming. Twitter has helped subsidize or pay for Twitter news programs. So in some ways, it seems that because there's this, I'm sure you've seen the chart of advertising revenue that was to newspapers going precipitously down, and revenue going to Google, ad revenue going precipitously up. So for a lot of news organizations who do not receive the special protections that Section 230 offers to technology companies, and yet at the end of the day, our bills are being paid by these technology companies. In some respects, the argument is, well, if it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck. Why is this not a duck? Is this just a shell game to say, no, we're not content companies, even though they pay for content?
This is one of the reasons why I've been talking for years about the fact that the FCC's regulations need to catch up with where their marketplace is. And so, for example, when it comes to broadcast TV news, I've consistently said that these broadcast TV companies, many of which, as you pointed out, have seen their advertising revenues shrink, especially during the pandemic, are competing against these digital technology giants, in particular Google and Facebook, which arguably have a duopoly when it comes to digital advertising. And so to the extent they're competing for the same dollars, it would seem to many people reasonable to say, well, okay, broadcast news, like this outlet, like a bunch of other outlets, shouldn't be shackled with these legacy regulations. And this is one of the things I think has finally dawned on people, regardless of your political affiliation, is that we need to make sure that there's a robust news media that's able to cover the stories that matter. That these companies are being starved of advertising revenue, in part because these outdated regulations are holding them back. We really need to take a careful look at that.
Well, I think we would agree with you on that, Chairman Pai. I want to move to, there was a Wired report on, again, it was nothing new that they found, but it was just new numbers, that the number of dollars, or the percentage of dollars flowing to Joe Biden, a Democrat, compared to Trump, it was 95% for Biden. So from what you've seen in Silicon Valley, we spoke earlier, I had worked with the Lincoln Network, which is a nonprofit that looks at these issues of possible workplace bias. And there are concerns among some people who are conservative or libertarian in Silicon Valley that they don't feel that they could bring their full selves to work, that they feel like they might be harassed, that they might have viewpoint discrimination in their own workplace. What's your read on this latest donation number? And do you think that folks who have a certain worldview might be discriminated against?
Yeah, I certainly can't comment on particular donation patterns, but what I can say is that I've heard from many people in Silicon Valley, libertarians and conservatives, who've told me privately that it is not an environment in which all of your views are welcome necessarily, and that they do have to hold back what they think for fear of being retaliated against. And that's exceptionally unfortunate in any walk of American life, especially one would think if you're working in the technology sector. The entire promise of technology, of course, is that you decentralize all of the gateways for speaking, and you just enable a full marketplace of ideas. And to the extent that people feel that they have to self-censor, that's exceptionally unfortunate. I mean, I think the entire culture that underlies the First Amendment, free speech, free expression, et cetera, presumes that we will come to the table in good faith and allow everyone to say his or her view. We might not agree with it, but at the end of the day, we'll defend it. Increasingly, that view of the First Amendment and the culture of the First Amendment is coming under attack. And it's ironic, to say the least, that Silicon Valley is one of the places where we see that phenomenon manifesting itself.
Sure. And in terms of the mediation or possible remedies, what would be the potential solutions for this?
It's hard to say. I mean, the FCC certainly doesn't have jurisdiction in this area, so it would have to be something beyond our agency. That Congress would have to take a look at it, or at least just having the conversation. I mean, that's one of the things I've tried to do, both when I was a commissioner in the previous administration and now as chairman, is talking about the need for a culture of free speech. And I know people's eyes glaze over when they hear that, but I think one of the hallmarks of American democracy is the fact that we do have a First Amendment and an expectation, at least a legacy expectation, that everyone would be welcome into the public square. Increasingly, we see people saying in a tribalistic way, if you're not a member of my tribe, I don't even want to hear you. Forget about my listening to you. I just don't want to hear you at all. That's a very dangerous road for us to go down. Many other countries have tried it in the past with very bad results. I don't want to see America become the kind of country where your ability to speak depends upon the favor of those to whom you're speaking.
All right, Chairman, one last question. You mentioned your agenda that was just released. What do you think is the biggest topic on your mind that's not getting enough attention on that agenda?
Oh, there's so much. I mean, a lot of stuff on tap, 5G in particular, going after robocalls. But for me, I would say the rural broadband issue. The digital divide has left too many Americans, especially in rural America, on the wrong side of this divide. And we want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to get them what I call digital opportunities. So we've got some exciting broadband initiatives, a rural broadband auction starting on October 29th, more Wi-Fi spectrum out there that will enable people to get fast speeds for free. A lot of good stuff going on rural broadband. So I wish that all of the hullabaloo over some of the issues that the FCC has dealt with in the past, like net neutrality, would be focused on things like the digital divide, where we're really making strides, and we need to have a sense of national purpose in going about that issue.
All right, Chairman Pai, we appreciate you joining us here at Just the News.
Thanks so much.